Welcome to the SOC Masterclass. The aim of this event is to bring together security operation leaders to upskill and inspire future security operation leaders and to collaborate on best practices. So for this session, I'd like to introduce Chris Schrauf. He is our solution architect at CyberProof for security information and event management. In this session, Chris will go through how exactly not only the best practices learn from his experience, but how also CyberProof are able to use those best practices to continuously adapt security operations practices to stay ahead of the ever-changing threat landscape. So, this is a challenge that I know Chris has heard a lot from his clients on what sort of steps should they be putting in place and technologies in order to be able to predict what threats are coming down the line, prioritize the steps and the content, whether it be playbooks, response playbooks, detection rules, etc., how they can prioritize those based on risk and continuously adapt to their specific threat profile. So in this session, Chris will go through a few key chapters, one of them looking at the key barriers to adapting your cyber defense, what a risk-based and meteor attack-based methodology really looks like, defining what that process should be in terms of looking at use cases, and then finishing off with analysis of XDR, the promise versus the reality. In this session, we will also, towards the end, just remind you to log into our quiz. So just stay tuned for that and make sure you're all ears so that you can test your knowledge at the end. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Ben. And I think our session will come to it's the last session, but it comes to a very good timing, because I think all what we have seen with this session, I will bring a little bit of conclusions inside of everything out from the data collection perspective, and especially from the technical methodology perspective. So I start now and share my screen. And maybe, Ben, you can give me a quick feedback if everybody can see it.
Yep.
Should be fine.
Yep, can see that. Go ahead.
Perfect. So as Ben introduced me already, my name is Christopher Schrauf, but short Chris. And I'm based out of Germany, and I work in the IT security field since 7+ years. And especially in the last 4 years before I joined CyberProof, I did build up security operations for a big manufacturing company, enterprise size, and here work with technologies like SIEM. So this kind of SOC Masterclass will especially look into how a brain of a SOC really works, and what we all have seen, what everybody mentioned, how this works in terms of methodologies, in terms of techniques. And I will give some tips, also what I learned in my path, in what I have seen, and give some really cool, maybe quick wins and tricks, how to react faster to an ever-changing threat landscape. So with this, I want to start, and I prepared actually 2 quotes. And this quote is actually hunting me since I started with cybersecurity, and our SOC manager, proved me not wrong. If you listened to the session before, he even used it. And through my investigation, it was not Kaspersky, it was Tetchline. And this guy came up with the quote, there are only 2 different types of companies: those who have been breached and know it, and those who have been breached and don't know it. Therefore, prevention is insufficient, and you need to invest into detection to react fast. And this was true when he said it. I don't know when he said it, and it's still true, even more true nowadays. And the second statement will wrap up a little bit what this whole masterclass is about, and it's from a British economist. It's very old, but it is very present in terms of data analytics, and these are important in cybersecurity, is torture the data and it will confess you everything. And this is especially true. So I want to kick off a little bit with challenges and barriers adapting your threat landscape. And for that, I digged a little bit into a report, and we did hear it in previous sessions as well. We have a big ever-growing threat landscape, especially also accelerated through war, cyber war, recently also the pandemic, and everybody wants to move forward in digitalization, self-driving cars, updates over the air in cars, IoT devices. So we move to the cloud. We want all our data in the cloud. We want to not get letters anymore. We want to have everything via mail. So yeah, this basically means, and here I put a comment from Checkpoint from a security report in 2020, and they're stating that cyber attacks against organizations worldwide increased by an average over 50% in 2021 compared to 2022. So we guys can only imagine what will happen from 2021 to 2022. And hackers get especially more clever. They don't sleep, so they get more creative, they're ambitious, they're intelligent. Today also we heard that they are collaborating, and here's just a small extract of, for example, I have this also from a report from a SIEM vendor, very recent from 2020, common threats and techniques used by cyber criminals. And I think our threat hunting team showed here in more detail what this means. So like stuff like account takeover, IoT threats, malicious PowerShell, phishing payloads. So these are all techniques used by attackers. And the challenge here is often these techniques, when you see them in the IT infrastructure, they are very aligned to methods of normal end user behavior. Yeah, so they are very aligned to what happens, maybe what someone is doing when he moves in your IT environment, when he uses your services. And this makes it especially difficult for us in IT security operations to see what is normal behavior and what is malicious behavior. And this gives us sleepless nights. And just to also state an example that I recently jumped over is for example, an employee in a company, in a media company, tried to access SQL database, and the service was down, the internal service. And he needed to test the urgent query for a release if the syntax is right. And so this person went to like a web page. He Googled, SQL syntax check, and he went to the web page. And this web page was actually copied from a proven web page where you can do this, and this was hosted in Russia. And he used basically the execution when the person loaded his file up to test the syntax. He used that to deploy his payload. And especially here, we in security operations in the middle, and I was also there out of my experience, to really see what is normal and what is malicious is extremely difficult, especially when it comes to developers, because they test a lot of stuff in your IT infrastructure, and this can be very much aligned to these techniques that you see above that I stated here. Yes, I'm turning on my laser pointer. So what can we do? What can we do? We heard a lot today, and of course, a big part of security operations, we love tools. Yeah, tools help us. We buy tools, we implement tools. There are tools for network security. There are endpoint protection tools like antivirus, EDR. There's the SIEM. There's SIEM in the cloud management. And of course, also the new technology, which is now getting more and more viral, I would say, is extended detection, XDR. So what is the challenge with tools? So I observed this since I'm working in cybersecurity, is that these security solutions, they come with out-of-the-box content. But especially in large environments, these out-of-the-box content does not work very good. Yeah, it works to some extent, but it also creates a lot of false positive. I don't say that out-of-the-box content is not a good start, but in complex environments with a lot of customization, it can create a lot of noise. And with that, if you then start to tune and work with your rules and try to enhance them, of course, yeah, insufficient rules, errors, misconfigured log sources, parsers, yeah, all these contribute to a poor detection coverage. And yeah, therefore, our security operations need to keep up with their detection quality, continuously improve it, and the outcome can only be to reduce the false positives. But this is a huge manual effort. And we heard a lot about the MITRE attack, and I will also elaborate later how it helps in automizing certain tasks to detect threats better. But for example, the vendor Cardinal Ops stated that the average SIEM vendors only cover 16% with their content of the MITRE attack technique. And that brings us also to a challenge that, yeah, vendors often overpromise a little bit, and I will elaborate a little bit what is here the reality, what is our homework that we have to do, and what are some tips and tricks that help here. So I want to kick this whole thing off, and this is pretty much aligned with what our team before showed, but I want to give it a little bit on a more high-level example. So this is basically how alert fatigue happens along the cyber attack kill chain. So every incident starts with something pretty normal, like a phishing email, or the example I gave with browsing. You click on something, you execute something, the attacker weaponizes, exploits, installs his payload. He can somewhat get access, get his command and control done. He can communicate to his own servers. And with that, he can really move in the environment. He can compromise accounts. He does lateral movement. He jumps to the next thing and gets into our data, maybe our cloud data. He does reconnaissance. He even does more privilege escalation. Maybe even he gets into our domains and our golden nuggets, and he can then exfiltrate data, access the data, even encrypt the data, do a lot of harm. So what can we do? What often is already there is we buy solutions in each of this pillar of the kill attack chain, of the cyber attack chain. So for example, in the beginning, we have like something like, we heard that also from our threat hunting team, we have web proxy or mail gateway, which are a great source of intelligence. Here, when it comes to tooling, we have EDR, firewall, EDS for the command and control, control activity, antivirus, of course, always there. We have some identity management to prevent lateral movement. And when it comes to our data, we have like infrastructure monitoring, the cloud CASP solutions. And all these solutions, of course, they are intelligent and they throw alerts when something is happening. And in bigger attacks, we heard that in our how is it called, in our play that was done by Roy, yeah, it can also turn into a lot of alerts. And yeah, if we have somewhat of a security operation already in place, at least what we do, we align all these alerts in a central environment where some human person can look at this and at least deal with them. But of course, the problem with that is, yeah, our security analysts get overflown. And I brought here a little graphic, and if you maybe are also listening and you have some security operations ongoing, and I had these comments very often, we see our human cybersecurity analysts drawn in a sea of alerts, and they ask themselves, where does this alert sometimes come from? Where there are no other alerts correlating with that? And with that, I want to jump in a little bit of the methodology part and show you guys what you can do to align this and prevent this phenomenon of alert fatigue in your SOC operations. So with that, I want to cover firstly some basics. We heard in my example in the kill chain, we need, in the bottom layer, we need data. We collect the data, and I will not talk here about technology yet, but yeah, data collection needs to be done. We need to torture our data. We need to make sense out of it. And when we have our data collected, often these are presented in key value pairs. in huge log files, and then we can, if we have the data in our system, we can parse it. We need to build some intelligence. Yeah, we do this with rules, with regex, with case if statements. We use out of the box content, and our rules can then basically trigger alerts. And yeah, if we have a lot of alerts, the optimal thing is if we can automate and give some guidance and processes. Here comes the statement of playbooks. And in the optimal case, we heard this also, we need some kind of threat intel that can feed in our rules, make them more clever, make them better, and also feed maybe in terms of an incident, so that our SOC, our human analyst, can, in case of an incident, advise our IT teams to what is happening, what is remediation, what should they do, what happens. Yeah. So with that background of very simple infrastructure, we need to do some homework. So here, most times log collection is done nowadays with SIEMs, and data and alerts in SIEMs come very often from multiple log sources. And the results are often in the same values of data. What does that mean? You see here, but occurring under multiple field names. So what does this mean? So basically your solution that you choose for mail proxy, that you choose for antivirus or other solutions, they give you your log files in kind of key value pairs that are very vendor specific. So for example, in this mail proxy, and please bear with me, these are just high level examples. These are not logs from a real mail proxy, but for example, they have a name like receiver device, sender IP, the header, which is the subject of the mail, and maybe in status, it has been delivered, rejected, is a spam. For example, antivirus solution very often gives like an endpoint, what was the endpoint IP when the virus was found, maybe some signature category, a signature name, stuff like that. So for correlation, we need to normalize these fields under common structure and naming convention. And luckily, SIEMs provide us here with methodology. And these are basically data modeling frameworks. And I stated here the three major SIEMs, known major SIEMs, and in Splunk, this is called SIEM, Common Information Model. Microsoft Sentinel states it as ASIM, Advanced Security Information Model, and Curator has the SIEM, Security Information Model. So what, in essence, does this mean? Basically, all the vendor-specific information that comes from the logs is then put into a normalized format. And this is just an example, but it's very often how it looks. You always have like a destination where the event is happening. You always have a source. You probably always have a message ID, some action, some user, in most cases, some signature. And what the common information model and SIEMs do, they basically say, okay, this is the most important information, the basic information that you need to build your intelligence, to build your rules. And this also aligns on the back end that the tool, the SIEM tool, can do very fast correlation. But this is just the beginning. You remember my kill chain model in the beginning. You have various sectors. You have a lot of tools. So this brings me a little bit to more advanced data modeling techniques of SIEM. So what they are doing is basically you have your basic model, but in each application sector or vector, like all your authentication logs, or your domain-related logs, or your endpoint-related logs, or your identity-related logs, they bring, of course, data models and more fields that you can map the key value pairs on it. And the thing is, what this means is that you have a fast computing power of your rules that can reduce costs. And still on top, you have your basic model that allows you to correlate. You will find these field names of course, in these log sources, in these domains. And yeah, this often vendors have here different approaches, how they tackle this in the backend. Some give you more flexibility to map these to your solutions that are in your environment. Some give you less, and you have to do less homework. But in either case, you have to do some steps mapping these fields. And the good thing about this exercise is it gives you also a little bit of insights in your own IT infrastructure. And this brings me to my next point. What can we do when we look into our own infrastructure? So we saw in my SOC operations framework, we saw that we collect data, but often these key value pairs like an IP address, a username, or even just a NT username or a computer name, and they don't give you really insightful, or give the analysts not really insightful news. So we have to use data enrichment methodologies. And this is sometimes a difficult task. In my past, I often had a lot of arguments with application owners to give me the right set of information. This could be because of GDPR, internal politics, but yeah, some really easy techniques that I developed, and I think quick wins that you can do is, if you, for example, have something like a zone concept in your environment. Of course, not everybody has this, but a zone concept is an awesome source, because you can say, okay, in some zone, all my normal endpoint users are. In some zones, if you find the IP, there are only servers. In the other zone is maybe some more critical information, like your Active Directory servers. And even if you've done a sophisticated zone concept, your golden nuggets, we heard it today, your IP, your intellectual property is behind another zone. So you can map this and use this information to enrich your data. What is also really clever is a user assessment. For example, look into your domains, look into your organic runs, and see, okay, what username is a CEO or a VIP, a CXO, what names, what user accounts are admin accounts, what usernames are endpoint accounts, what usernames are developer accounts. And also a very good source, but this depends on how good the CMDB is built up in the organization. In my knowledge, this is often not so sophisticated that we in the IT security hope of, but still, in my opinion, some clever nerd who built that up has put some thoughts into the CMDB. And if you look deeply into the data, you will find some naming convention that at least will tell you, okay, this username is pointing to that machine. This beginning of a certain destination name of certain computer is a server. Yeah, and you can, we heard it today, there's a technique called regex, and you can then extract basically these parameters out of your log files. So what can we do with that? In the SIEM world, we have something like lookups, others call it also watch lists, and we can basically pass this information that we fetched as enrichment relevant information. We can put this into CSV files, and mostly these are CSV files, and we can correlate it via matching into our intelligence, into our log sources, because now we know that this user is probably admin. Also, in time of the incident, he was in the zone server, and probably the IP address is also aligned to this zone. So this is enrichment on a very high level. These are enrichment technologies. But now, what can we really do with that to reduce alert fatigue and also to respond to threats in a better way? So this brings me a little bit to the risk-based mapping methodology. So what you can basically do is you define in your rule set, in your intelligence, you define certain risk objects. For example, a risk object can be a user, a risk object can be a destination, a risk object can be a domain, a risk object can be a IP address. And you basically say, okay, if these guys, one of these risk objects or many of those are in a finding of a rule, you give the rule also a base score. This is the terminology of fidelity. And you say, okay, this rule then gets a score as well. So what happens? You say basically, okay, this user has a score of 95. This endpoint has a score of 70. And the rule base score is 1.2. This in the alert says then, okay, this has a scoring of 198. And this means, okay, this alert is critical. How can we correlate this information? Of course, we also use our enrichment methods, and we fetch this information from a user lookup, from a desk lookup maybe. Also, we build up our rule lookups, which are, for example, there can be, we say that in the early stage, we heard it today, that in active scanning or in develop capabilities of the MITRE framework very early, we have to pay attention on this. And if a rule detects something here, we give it a higher base score. And then we have like a severity lookup for all our incidents and say, okay, if the rule then falls into that kind of scoring and we match this to the lookup, we say, okay, the alert is critical. So what does this really mean when it comes to triaging and incident handling? That means basically, if we correlate the number of incidents to the mean time to acknowledge, or the SLA, in most cases, of course, critical incidents have a much higher mean time to acknowledge. That means the analyst has to look at them first before he looks at other incidents. So with the risk-based mapping, you probably will reduce the amount of critical alerts, you will reduce the amount of high alerts, and you will have probably some more medium to low alerts. But yeah, we will look at the critical and meaningful alerts first, and give also the opportunity then to the security, to the human analysts to triage them, maybe see similarities of our risk objects in other alerts, and then really can draw conclusions to really react. And even there, you can bring additional intelligence, like threat intelligence inside. Yeah, this brings me to the next thing, our intelligence. What can we do when we have done all this homework? Then it gets now really awesome, because now we can think, and we heard it, I think, through all the presentations today a lot, we can start with building really intelligence, building automation. So what does this mean? We can basically say, and you remember, again, my kill chain, we can say, okay, we have an alert in, for example, suspicious mail attachments. We have a second alert in suspicious IDS traffic. Yeah, something is happening internally. We have a third alert, for example, in account escalation, and all that appear in a time frame, for example, of 160 hours on a certain risk object that is the same through all these alerts. And then we can say, okay, this looks so critical, I create an incident right automatically out of it. And yeah, now maybe you ask yourself, yeah, what does the MITRE ATT&CK framework see in all of it? What does the threat intel see in all of that? And I want to bring some light in that. If you're joining new, but probably you saw this today, this is the MITRE framework, and there is something like the navigator. And if you start the exercise, and out of my experience, when as these companies decide to build up their own security operations, this is the step done at the latest stage. But in my opinion, you should do it really from the beginning. Map your alerts, because then you can see over time your coverage in certain vectors of the kill chain that the MITRE ATT&CK has. And for those who don't know, the MITRE is basically a framework where you have a lot of techniques and tactics that are really used or have been used by certain malicious actors. So this is a really, really good source, a framework, a channel that you can rely to and really see, okay, that is my coverage level. And it's amazing what you can do. The navigator, you can Google it, you can use it right away and play around with it. But basically that aligns all your rule set that you currently have. It gives you a good statement on you can improve over time. What does it mean in terms of threat intelligence? So what the MITRE ATT&CK framework also gives, and even better if your threat intelligence has even information additionally to that. So in this example, I want to look, for example, at the APT. This is a threat actor group called Silence, and this is a relatively new threat actor operating since 2016, I think. And evidence has shown that these are active in 25 countries worldwide. There's a confirmed damage about $800,000 US, and they use a lot of ransomware techniques. And these techniques are very aligned, so they stay hidden. It's very aligned to what happens in the normal IT operations. So if you go into the MITRE ATT&CK technique, even it's so awesome, it shows what techniques on the cyber kill chain these attack groups are using. You can click on them and then you get the outlook, okay, what they are using. You can browse into them and they give you a lot of detail. And even enriched to our threat intel, you can then say, okay, I browse, like we learned with lookups, you can browse for certain IOCs, and then you can build your search on it. You can say, okay, if, for example, in this phase of the APT, in for example, then 160 hours, but often they are way longer. Like here I'm giving, for example, in this example, 240 hours. If we detect certain rules go off in that phase over a time frame on a certain risk object, then we create an incident in phase 2. And this is really a technique, if you do these exercises, to really be, in a way, at least prepared to advanced threats, or at least be aware when they are happening. And this, I think, is a really, really clever way of being, at least having the insights in your organization, how you are vulnerable. And the cool thing is also in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the groups are bound to certain, for example, they act in certain vectors. Like I think we have later example, one actor is especially prone to finance and healthcare vectors. So with this background, I want to give a little bit of example of CyberProof's use case management. And if you followed our sessions earlier, I think Bruce covered this also. But what our use case management methodology is, that we really want to give insights. We do workshops, we do risk assessments, we look what the organization threat models are, what are scenarios, and we map them to techniques like I showed. We define use case requirements. We define also log sources, which bound to the certain risk assessments that we do. And just a lot is not always good. It is to be pointed out what is really important to you. And then we review that with threat detection capabilities. We see what existing use cases you have. We make the MITRE ATT&CK gap analysis, see how you evolve over time. We review your security analytics tools, your event log sources, if there are broken collectors, if there's too much data in, we make coverage analytics, and then we test the use case effectiveness. And we heard this also today. This is a continuous process. We need to be, our hackers are not sleeping, so we also cannot sleep. So it's a continuous development process. Yeah, and with that, we have use case maintenance. We maintain, manage libraries out of our experience. We we create or change dashboards that you have. We really fine tune for effectiveness, and we have KPIs that you handle critical alerts first and do the correlation then with them around the critical events. I want to give a short example how out of the box rule works, and how you can, with some easy, it's a small example, with some easy alteration, our teams then make these rules better and give more insights into it. So this is a rule that comes from Microsoft Sentinel. It's a KQL query that looks into known magnesium IP. Magnesium is a hacking group that targets companies, like I previewed a little bit before, especially in the public health and health care sector. And they're using stealth techniques that rely heavily on VPN. And they establish very long persistence in the infrastructure. So it's very difficult to find them. So basically what this search does, it looks into known IPs. You see them here, known CNCs that these hackers use. So how can you enrich this search, this search, make it a little bit more meaningful? For example, is that, you establish it to a MITRE ATT&CK tagging. Also that what we did, we hooked the known IPs to a dynamic lookup table from our threat intel. And also we enriched a little bit more sources. So we parsing these IPs also, for example, through the virtual desktop connection logs, and also through the Microsoft Defender Cloud app Shadow IT log. So if there is an unknown IP in your system, then this rule will also trigger. So these are small things that you can do to make the out-of-the-box content a little bit better and give you more meaningful alerts than it does when it comes out of the box. So with that, I want to come to the next topic, the XDR promise versus reality. So what do we have learned so far? With that, I want to bring some light into what the XDR really does. So if we look here with that infrastructure example, let's just all imagine we are a very big company. We have a lot of services. We have even a lot of security products. I know this is unrealistic, but we have a lot of infrastructure apps. We do OT. We have some manufacturing. We have some various endpoints. We also are active in the cloud. We have cloud services. And with that, we start with a SIEM, we collect the data, we make, in a very painstaking process, we think about, okay, what do we have to do in terms of intelligence? What do we have to do in terms of automation? Maybe then we also find out that we have too much data. We have to outsource the cold data, maybe in a data lake, the hot data to correlate fast with the data modeling that I showed through our SIEM. We have our intelligence and content ready. We have our playbooks ready. Maybe we do automation with the help of a SOA tool. And we think, yeah, we are in a good stage. And then some sales guy comes and says and tells you, oh, but XDR can do all of that. So what does this look on paper? So what I did here is a little bit, I digged into the features that the XDR promises to have aligned through what is generally used, like in an ADR, SOA solution, SIEM. So for SIEM, yeah, you can do the data separation and the retention. You can do threat hunting, the correlation, of course, what we learned. You can do incidents and alerts. You can do prioritization, MITRE attack mapping. In SOA, you can do the workflows, maybe even if it is a good SOA, automated root cause analysis. You have responses that you can click on. And your EDR, of course, gives you in all these spaces also the visibility into the endpoint and also brings some dashboards and threat interfeeds. I think this was a question in the session before. Yeah, so the XDR says it all does this. And I have to say, this is quite impressive. It sounds almost too good to be true. And here I want to give an example, and I don't want to do every vendor flame or anything. This is an example on the XDR methodology from Microsoft. So what you see here is what they are doing with their Defender solutions. They are looking especially in their own product environment, but also, of course, in some external logs and passing them also into the XDR with the SIEM. So in my opinion, looking at these solutions that come in with fusion rules and everything, of course, they work very well. This is a very, very good approach. But in my opinion, in my personal opinion, in the current stage, these are mostly limited to the solutions where the XDR is pretty familiar with. Because by now you should know the correlation and everything you can only do if you know your logs, if you know your data, if you tortured your data and applied all the methodologies that I have shown so far in the previous slides. So of course, if you know your data very well, if you have your own established environments like your Azure, your LDAP, Office 365, of course, then you can do advanced ruling and all these correlations out of the box or with your XDR terminology. And yeah, I would say this works very well. It works very good. It detects a lot of threats. And in my opinion, in SOC operations, we should keep our eyes on this XDR thing and really monitor what it brings to the table, because it is a very good approach. And yeah, with that, I just want to show finally how we at CyberProof think a really sophisticated architecture for reacting to advanced threats are. So again, we imagine we are a big organization. We have a lot of services. We pass our data into the XDR and the SIEM through a log collection layer where we separate cold data and hot data that we want to parse quickly. We have detection rules. We have a risk-based mapping. We do MITRE mapping. We involve our threat intel. We take care of our use case management, which is aligned with playbooks in a SOA platform that can basically our professionals can work with, our client professionals can work with, they can collaborate, they get all the transparency, they have a single pane of glass. And of course, these technologies then give infos into the intelligence, the advanced threat intel. We work closely together. You saw all the rules from our threat hunting. And eventually, if you do all the insights, threat hunting rules at some point evolve into a SIEM rule, which continuously didn't detect a threat that your threat hunting team or your threat intelligence discovered. Same thing can be done with vulnerability management. You can say, okay, you have certain CVs, match for them if they are flowing in your environment. So you have your XDR, a part on your SIEM, your XDR focus on the technology it's really good at. The other technology is not so good at, you cover with the SIEM. And this is really a architecture to really respond sophisticatedly to threats. With that, I want to come to the conclusions. What did we learn in my little presentation today? So we have to torture your data. This is no way around it. We need to normalize, we need to model our security data to make efficient use out of it. Also, we need to utilize intelligence and frameworks. You are not alone here. Use schemas and threat intelligence provided by experts or frameworks. Automation is key. We saw it again and again. And what helps you here is build a scoring to really look at the meaningful incidents, enrich your data, see what your risk objects are, and that helps you also. This collaboration in your internal IT helps you to gather the knowledge about your own IT infrastructure, and you will have awesome automation. And also a conclusion is, even with the most sophisticated tools, it will not prevent your security operations from hands-on work. You need to do your homework, you need to configure, you need to enhance the security posture to prevent alert fatigue and burning out your human analysts. So I think, Ben, with that, the next thing is a quiz, right?
Exactly. Thank you very much, Chris. A very thorough presentation, and a lot to go through and to think about when looking at your existing investments, either in the SIEM, EDR, what you can be doing on top of that. So everyone, please do log into www.kahoot.it and put in the following PIN 1071706 to get ready for our quiz. Whilst we're letting everyone go into that, and by the way, I put the link in the chat, so you can just click on the link directly. Just have a couple of questions for you, Chris. Just going back to the first part of your presentation around the ability to kind of torture your data, to be able to identify some of the key values and fields, and make sure that you're using a couple of methods to enrich. So you use examples like CMDB. Is this something that the tooling can provide out of the box, or are you suggesting that there needs to be a further level of data engineering that needs to be done on top of that?
The answer is here, it depends. So I think these tools, especially SIEM tools, they exist since a long time, so they're getting better. And I think most of the stuff in Splunk, for example, the data onboarding methodology is a technical add-on that they have like a play store where a lot of solutions already exist, and they do all the nitty-gritty, the regexes, the regular expression, the parsing is already done for you. Sentinel, for example, has a lot of out-of-the-box collectors. And I think even Curator does this with the appliance and look into the logs. So yes, I would say they do this task to a certain extent for you. But in my experience, still you need to at least make thoughts about what is important in your rules, in your intelligence. So, and especially if you have bigger and complex environments, your people in the appliances, they put on some mark in the appliance, and it sends a little bit of a different data, or they have some scripts to have some insights into something that is not out of the box. And then often these TAs, these classic connectors, they fail, and you still can use them, but you also need to go into the nitty-gritty and then do this customization to really see what you want to see. So I think in most of the cases it works very well, but of course, completely you are not safe to doing some manual investigation, and you at least need to do the confirmation if everything is correctly extracted. So this you have to do, of course.
So as you say, it goes back to not just assuming that everything out of the box is going to work for you. It starts by, and I guess referring back to that use case management framework, doing that risk and threat modeling against the meter attack framework, which you also referred to. Make sure you're reviewing and validating that your current threat detection capability, where are the gaps, going through that continuous content development, and then maintaining those use cases as well. So, and as we outlined, there's those 4 key phases. Is something that you can also it's something that we do at CyberProof with our clients quite a lot to help them to manage that whole process. And as you said, it's particularly the case in more complex environments, the need for it.
Yeah, and I think it's not a shame. This is really what I showed at the end. This is really like the master class, I would say, and this is how our thing is, our webinar is also called. This is really the master class. This is the best case scenario how it should look at the end. So I think it's really good to have someone that takes you by hand, that does this, has this done several times and has all the methodology already ready, and can guide you a little bit through the customization that you need to do in your environment. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Chris. Really great workshop there. And with that, it's time to move on to our final quiz of the day.